It's like being caught in the headlights of a car down here. So I'm going to be talking about multidisciplinary attacks, in particular, really how bank attacks are done today. We've been talking a lot throughout today about cross-site scripting, SQL injection, a bit of this, a bit of that. Unfortunately, the real stuff, the way that people are really breaking into bank accounts and really doing the damage to web applications, has nothing to do with that stuff. Okay, so there are lots of ways of breaking into a bank. Okay, and the cross-site scripting, SQL injection is pretty. There's some nice academic papers about it. I've been a consultant for a large number of years. I've used and written plenty of reports about how to use this and find vulnerabilities in that. But in reality, if you're going to steal lots of money from a bank account and you're going to do it remotely, you're not going to be pissing around with cross-site scripting and SQL injection. Okay. So a lot of people here, how many people in here are security consultants or have done penetration testing? So about a third. So I'm assuming that a large number of people in here are more on the coding side or having to look after applications. Okay. So if we look at it from a penetration testing perspective, you have your creative tools that you need for testing applications. You've probably got a personal web proxy, a vulnerability scanner, a fuzzer suite, compiler. Some people may even go as far as some static analysis tools, although the number of people that have can bridge the gap, the skills gap between web application security and malware analysis is fairly rare. And there's only a few people I know about who are really good at this. The problem is that the vulnerabilities inside web banking applications are more than code injection and is much more than authentication bypasses. Frankly, it's application flow and the user experience and the way it's manipulated is how the criminals are really breaking into these web applications. And what I'm really going to be talking about today is how this malware is actively being used today, how sophisticated it actually really is, how it operates against web applications, and what sort of things you need to take into mind in designing and developing web applications, and the security advice you give from a consulting perspective, and how to combat the latest generation of malware. Okay. So given this is Owasp, who really cares about malware? In fact, you need to start thinking about why does someone break into a web application? And you also need to understand or appreciate the how is really dictated by how easy it is and the probability of success. Okay. So as a bit of background, so the world that we live in today, you would have seen that from a IBM ISS perspective, we're currently monitoring around about 100,000 defacements per week. Okay. So these are websites or web pages that have been defaced and typically have an embedded iframe. Okay. The largest attacks that we've seen using SQL injection to carry out defacements have reached up to about 1.5 million sites. Okay. We also see that critical components of this ecosystem of breaking into banks are really the botnets and the botnet empires and the agents. You'll have plenty of statistics ranging from somewhere between 10 and 200 million bot agents out there. And Stormworm itself is often talked about of being about 10 million bots. Personally, I think the estimates are way too high. A lot of the bot engines, a lot of the compromised hosts that I've seen have typically had between 4 and 10 different bot agents actually installed on them. So once a machine is compromisable and has been affected with a bot, then more than likely that user has been using that machine has been compromised by many, many other bots. Okay. Another key thing to bear in mind is that today your basic identity information, so your credit card and duplication of credit card information and your address currently goes for around about 5 cents. Okay, if you buy in batches of about 10,000. So from a web application security perspective, this is the tricky part. How do you do online business if about a third of your customers out there, scattered around the globe, are already compromised and you can't actually trust the information that comes from those machines? Okay, and this is this is the paradigm that we now need to face from from security consulting perspective and also the way that we develop and design applications. Okay, we've been talking about how does someone break into our individual application? How does someone manipulate that application? Now you need to look at the other side and assume that the people who are using your application are already compromised. And what value is that? What value and what sort of process do you need to enact to be able to protect your application and your structure from your customers? So malware is really at the heart of organized crime and organized bank attacks. So if we look at a fairly standard suite of malware today, it's damn sophisticated. Okay. So you've got all the classic key logging, screen capture, video replay. It's going to bypass a lot of the technologies that you use for detecting whether it's a real person at the end using the machine. Okay. We see remote session writing frameworks, all the stuff about cookie stealing, session hijacking. This is already done. It's all built into the malware, and these kits are available at from any high street retailer almost. The attacks and the mechanization of these attacks using malware are script-driven. Okay, and you can buy these templates to actually drive these scripts from third-party providers. And of course, the last thing you've got really is about full self and anti-debugging features. So this stuff is really sophisticated, and it's designed to not be detected, and also to make it damn hard for someone like myself and my research teams to actually reverse engineer and figure out what's going on. But the most important thing really about today's malware is about the social engineering. Okay, so all of these are devices and mechanisms for allowing them to conduct the attack. The attack is successful because of the social engineering aspects. So I include this slide because, frankly, 10 years ago, everyone was chasing after little bits of malware. Malware today is big, big, big business, and I'm going to talk about just how big this business is going on. And frankly, your antivirus suites and things like that are inadequate. The fact that you're relying on antivirus at the end machine, whether it's a corporate desktop, laptop, or your home machine, is pretty much redundant. Okay, by the time the malware can be detected or is in a position to possibly be detected at the desktop, it's too late. Okay. So the question really, evolving from this, is how did the customer become the problem? Your end user, how did they become the problem? So iframe injection averaged about 100,000 web defacements per week, and this sort of thing really started February, March early this year, and since then it's actually been fairly constant. We've seen the classic IIS ensembles and the LAMP frameworks being popularly attacked. Most sites that we come across and that we inventory have no idea that they've already been attacked successfully and defaced. The defacement is really about iframe code injection, and as you see it on here, here's a sample iframe of, in fact, I think this was from one of the storm worms, or one of the iframes injected via the storm botnets. And so it's a single line sitting inside the web page. So defacements before used to be about putting up a nice big message saying, aren't I cooler than the sysadmin, or some sort of political message. Defacements today are about these iframes. I've come across websites that have up to 10 different iframes from different people that have compromised the same websites. Okay. The whole purpose of these iframes is to infect anyone that visits those browsers, uses their web browser and visits those sites. Okay, and installs malware through droppers or backdoors and adds them to the botnets. Okay. So if you're going to build up this sort of attack, this is how industrious this thing is. SQL injections, all these things that you've heard about, the 1.5 million websites in one single day done through SQL injection. Here's a tool. It's a Chinese tool. It retails for $30. It requires a license. And actually the encryption of the license key means that it's actually their DRM is better than what you'll find in most Microsoft products. Okay. So if you want to get some tips in DRM and protecting your code, then these types of guys just know what to do. This particular tool, you find a new vulnerability in a web type application, a new cross-site scripting bug from somewhere. You type it into this particular tool. It will then tie into Google. It will then pull back all the different sites that are potentially vulnerable to it. You specify a URL where your malware is that you want to install through the iframe, and click Go. Okay. This tool gets up to about 5,000 defacements per minute. Okay. So what else? Understanding the IFRAME business. Just to give a better idea of the scale of things. So we come across all these IFRAME servers that are serving up malicious iframes. So they may have been defaced through cross-site scripting, SQL injections, search engine optimization attacks, or in fact, they may be owned by the particular group, or there's all the different sorts of schemes. So you can set up this business yourself. In fact, most of these people will actually pay you to insert the code into your page, a bit like Google advertising. Okay. This stuff then goes onto the exploit script service. So these, again, other servers that have been compromised or are parts of botnet empires. And they are serving up the malicious JavaScript, ActiveX exploits, missing codecs, Office documents, and things like that. So this is where the part of the malware comes in, and exploit, which then connects back to the malware servers. And so these malware servers are doing, providing all the custom malware and all the banking trojans. The thing to realize is that all these different parts are different groups, more often than not, and they're all working together as part of an ecosystem. It gets even tougher because then there's another ecosystem down the bottom here, such as providing fast flux services, single or double fast flux, that then protects all of these compromised hosts from being taken down. Okay. So that's what, this is the framework for getting those millions and millions of hosts compromised. Now, the tools themselves, the drive-by download tools, have become commercial entities. Okay, so in the last year and a half, so here we have Web Attacker, MPack, I'm sure everyone's heard, IcePack, FirePack, Neosploit, BlackSun. These are all tools, these are all exploit engines that are installed on compromised websites to serve up the iframe bad stuff. Okay. It's become very, very competitive. Here's an interesting one, IcePack. It's probably one of the most popular ones that we see out there from a commercial perspective. MPack is a very interesting one. MPack is a copy, if you like, of some of the IcePack ingenuity. Commercial, two versions. There's the basic version, it goes for about $30. It only contains a couple of exploits. And then there's the advanced edition, or the platinum edition, goes for about $400 and has all the latest exploits. As a subscription service, reading all the latest exploits and keeping them up to date. So originally in Russian, but there's now an English and French version. So localization of these tools and that as well. Okay. This is big, big business. Has iframers, and once again requires a license to operate. Okay. Now the other side, the malware. So we need a piece of malware and we want to infect a particular machine. Surely it's a bit hard to create malware. Frankly, here's a toolkit which I grabbed earlier from this year. £100, includes all of these particular exploits. You give it a file that you want to install on the remote machine, so some sort of backdoor or a bot agent. Click which exploits you want to embed inside it. So anyone who opens that document will be, these vulnerabilities will be attempted to be exploited on that machine to install. Okay. So as far as skill set goes for creating malware, infecting machines successfully, 100 quid. Okay. And it's updated, and so this one's from the beginning of the year, so we just see a few of the more popular vulnerabilities in Microsoft vulnerabilities from last year. But they don't need to be perfect because, unfortunately, I helped release the paper with Google and ETH University about 2 months ago, and we found roughly about 630 million hosts vulnerable to all these attacks that haven't been patched for at least a year. Okay. Other things that are interesting, so these banking trojans, so all the really nasty stuff, here is a commercial one. Okay. So this particular one, Turkojan, interesting, it's made in Turkey. Okay. This is a commercial product. It contains all of the remote desktop, the web streaming, the video capture, you name it, everything you need to do to copy all of those cool things from people's machines and steal that information. Now, how commercial is it? 3 editions, the bronze edition, silver edition, and gold edition. $99 through to $249. Interesting thing about the gold edition, it says 6 months or 9 months guaranteed replacement warranty if it gets detected by any antivirus product. Okay. This is so competitive, this world of creating malware for this type of industry, that they're competing against each other, and these are the selling features. Okay. But it doesn't even stop there. For instance, there are a whole number of tools and technologies for if you take a piece of malware, you want to check to see whether any antivirus product can actually detect it and protect against it. So these tools, so here we have KIMS, we have, which one's that? Scanlix, And this last framework here, Multi-AV Fixer, will actually test your malware. It will automatically pull down all the different free antivirus products, the commercial antivirus, keep them up to date, run your malware against them, find out which ones detect it, and then tweak your malware to make sure it bypasses the antivirus. This stuff's free. Okay, so if you want to create a piece of malware that's going to bypass anything, this will help you do it. So let's get into some of the interesting things. So this is, given that we talked about why so many people are being compromised with these hundreds of millions of machines compromised, and how easy it is to start up business in there and all this different malware and creating your own business in that. How does it really, really work? Traditional banking malware was focused on stealing the login information. So everything you needed, the bank number, the user ID, the password, session keys, this sort of thing. So you relied on key logging, screen grabbing, video recording, redirection to counterfeit sites, pop-ups, overlays, session hijacking, duplicating session cookies, screen overlays, all these sorts of things. These are all the good things that we've heard lots and lots about. We'll still find lots and lots of malware doing this. Okay. But from a protection perspective, there are a lot of things you can do. So instead of asking for a full password, you only ask for certain parts of the password so that screen capture or key loggers can't get all of the password each time. So there's a lot of new technologies or newish technologies that have been embedded into web applications to stop this type of stuff. Okay. But this type of malware, traditional banking malware, has been around since about 2001, 2002. Okay. So this is old hat. So a brief thing about man in the middle. So typically, you want to do customer's PC, connect to the web service, and everything's nice. Okay. So man in the middle, of course, the man in the middle sits in the middle, intercepts all the different traffic. So it redirects the connection to the end servers through proxy setting changes, DNS modifications, or network routing changes. And of course, this allows the attacker themselves to view all the texting, all the communications in clear text. So you can intercept confidential data, terminate SSL transactions, connections, and modify and inject new content. Obviously, there are a number of different tools and technologies that you can use to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. Okay, and there are a lot of nice algorithms that you can use from the server side to detect whether this is going on. There's a lot of heuristics that you can play from a large application side about whether you're seeing the same man-in-the-middle appearing on multiple transactions. So from a banking perspective, protecting against man-in-the-middle attacks is a solved problem. Okay, it's still a problem, but it's a solved problem.
Wait a minute, what if I'm a large company with a proxy? You'll see a lot of transactions in the same place. A lot of users in the same place. So what can you speak on the algorithms?
Well, a lot of times that you'll see is, because you're going through the proxy, you also see that the SSL certificates are linked to that particular machine. There's a lot of classification on geo-IP address. There's a lot of sophisticated stuff going there. But yes, corporate proxies are a pain for this type of detection, but given the scale of online banking, then people sitting behind corporate proxies doing this are only a very, very small part of that pain. Okay, so it's a scale problem in this. Question, Matt?
How does the attacker create man-in-the-middle attack? How does he create?
That's another whole presentation. there are lots and lots of different ways. I mean, the key things, man-in-the-middle redirection. So effectively, if I've got a server somewhere, if I can alter the proxy settings in the web browser of the end user, if I can intercept their network traffic, I'm sitting on the same network segment, if I can modify DNS settings or any other network stuff, that's how I can insert my man-in-the-middle. Okay. And there's a whole number of other sort of frameworks of being a little bit more aggressive about inserting man-in-the-middle. Okay. The real thing, though, is the bad guys have moved well beyond that. So the key thing, what we're seeing today, is called man in the browser. Okay. So the man in the middle, that man in the middle is now sitting inside the web browser. Okay. So because you're sitting in the browser, okay, so you can see, so traditional malware, you're normally looking at the system reconfiguration, you've got Trojan applications, you've got operating system hooking and TCP/IP stack and deception. So this is where a key loggers sort of certain things. Man in the browser goes inside the browser. Okay, so it's operating inside the browser. So all these things about having to load extra applications and get those running and mimicking, or Trojans, having to intercept the stack and things, doesn't matter if you're operating inside the browser. The browser has the secure connection between the end sites. So what does this really mean? So the man in the browser, Trojans, more often they're called now proxy Trojans. They operate from within the web browser by hooking key operating system and web browser APIs and proxy all the HTML data. What this means is that the attacker themselves doesn't care about encryption. That happens at a lower layer. Okay. They can inspect any content sent or received by the browser. They can inject and manipulate any content before rendering it within the browser. And they can dynamically create additional get, post, put, you name it, at any time to any destination from within the browser while the person's operating it. So on a clean system, what you normally expect is the web browser then connects to, transmits data or connects the data to the WinINet, the WinSock, and now it's the internet. So frankly, it's dead simple. The malware now hooks in between the browser and the WinINet. Okay. Isn't sophisticated stuff. In fact, if you use any of your other sort of pen testing tools, then you're probably already doing this in some capacity already. However, the malware themselves are hooking inside the web browser. So what does this really mean for these types of attacks? This means that not only can I steal login credentials, I can ask for more. Okay, so I can do things such as I can add additional pages and additional information before the user logs in. I can do the same sort of thing, adding new things, new pages, new content, new page requests while they're logging in, and I can do it all after they've logged in as well. So at any stage within that conversation with the banking application, I can do all this through the malware. Which means that it makes me a lot easier for me to get away from my attack from social engineering perspective. Okay, so some of the things that we've seen already. So I can request additional data through social engineering. So once someone logs into their banking application, all of a sudden I now have a page that appears up while they're logged in, complete with the little wee lock on their screen, saying that, would I now like to double check or register my credit card details? So that people type in their credit card details and their PIN number, the CVV code, and things like this. Okay. We also see the same page is now asking for additional security questions. So having gone through your normal login phase, it's adding another login phase, asking for your social security number, your mother's maiden name, all these additional things. All the things that you probably need to recover passwords for other accounts and things like that afterwards. Okay. Other things, we're seeing one-time keypads and scratch cards. They're popular in South America for online banking. Every time you log in, you scratch one particular number off, and that's the number that you have to use. The following number is what you use next time you log in. Yeah? It's one-time password. It's the most secure method. So once you've logged in, it just asks you for the next 2 or 3, and people fill out these details. And so that means that your one-time keypads have been defeated. You can ask people to change their password. So even though you didn't get their full password the first time round, you ask them to change it. And then of course you just say it failed, but you've now got their old password. Okay. You can also then test and resynchronize password and transaction calculators. And I'll get on to a little bit more on that as well. Keeping though, as far as the conversation between the web browser, the user, and the bank, everything is intact. Okay. The bank has no idea this is going on. The web browser has no idea it's going on. And only users that understand that there have been changes to the pages are actually going to be aware of what's going on. So here's one. This is a real one, carefully disguised from the particular bank. So on the right-hand side, here's the normal panel that appears on the login. Here we have one that's been modified through this particular piece of malware sample. So instead of it's asking for username, passwords, and then which country, which state you're doing it from, it's inserted a few extra parts. It's asking for your check card number, your expiration date, and the PIN number and mother's maiden name. I think it was a little bit optimistic of them to be asking that on the login. But people do this. Don't forget, the padlock is still intact. This is the bank's page. Okay, but this has all been added inside the browser. There's no way that the bank knows that this is going on. And of course, any data that's inputted into this will never go back to the bank either, so they wouldn't know that it's been intercepted. Sounds pretty scary. The scary thing that really comes to that particular box is a configuration file. Okay, so this malware and these malware tools are designed to be fully configurable. This particular bank and the scripts that you need for this particular framework and all that, you buy. Okay, so you buy the malware from about $400 to about $1,500, depending on which particular flavor you want to do, whether you want to host it in this country, if you want someone to host the engine for you, or you want to rent the system, whatever. You can buy these configuration files for particular banks. They go for about $5 to $15, depending on which particular bank. So not only do we have these parties that are creating this malware, we have this distribution, and we also have this third-party developers that are developing the configuration and tuning files that go into the malware itself. Okay. So that's all very well about stealing usernames, passwords. What happens when you're on multi-factor authentication and you've got a one-time password, it's your secure ID token and things like that? Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if you want to, the purpose of breaking into bank accounts is to steal money. Okay. Stealing passwords and usernames are a way to get into the account so you can steal money. But what you're really after is that transaction. So even with all these multiple authentication systems and validation systems on the login, it doesn't matter. Okay. What they're now doing is focusing on the money transfer itself. Okay. And we started already seeing this early 2007. It started off in South American banks. Okay. It was driven largely by multi-factor authentication keys, back-end heuristics for logging in, so seeing certain IP addresses appearing in different countries and browsers, physical location, and frankly, just malware has improved since that time. So it's become, before I had to go out and build this type of malware myself, I can now just go online and purchase what I need. Okay. And it has all the different features. So because the transfers happen after the person's logged in, it makes it very, very difficult for their banks to actually see what's going on. So these fraudulent transactions are occurring while the user is logged into their bank accounts from their machine. Okay. So how are the banks meant to know that this is a fraudulent transaction? And hence, session writing. So the first versions that we saw, the session writing of, taking over that particular session and doing an extra transaction, were largely manual. It's now been scripted. So what does it really look like? So from a man in the browser, from the proxy Trojan. So the user logs in. Don't care what sort of authentication system or whatever. Let's assume that that's totally secure. Okay. What's going on is, as soon as they have logged in, the malware kicks up. It actually starts really doing its actions. So the first thing it does is it intercepts every single transaction. Okay. Every single transaction, it adds another transaction or changes the value of that transaction. It keeps a log of those transactions, calculates what's supposed to be in the count in the return pages, modifies those pages and sends it back to the user. So not only has it done a two-transaction or an extra transaction while you've been logged in, it's also removed all evidence that you can see from within that web browser. Okay. So this type of technology of actually doing this has been around for about a year now. Okay. Now part of this is really about, different countries have different regulations about if someone steals money from my bank account, how long is the bank liable for? So by operating this way, by hiding the transaction of stolen money from the end user, a lot of countries only have 30 days or 60 days. So therefore, after 30 days or 60 days, if you haven't notified the bank that you've had money stolen, the bank is no longer responsible for trying to get it back to you. So if I can use this malware and keep those people duped for that long, they're not going to be able to come after me and reverse those transactions out anymore. So the money is now mine. It becomes a user problem after that time. So yeah.
How can bank prevent it? I believe it's the user's problem from the beginning.
Well, it's down to the countries. Different countries have different banking regulations. So for instance, in the UK, the bank is always responsible for any money that comes out of your transactions. So even if it's a year later and you say it was fraudulent, and you can prove it was fraudulent, then they are bound to repay that money. Okay. So it depends a little bit on which countries.
But banks only send the money to other banks that you already provisioned in your account.
Correct.
So, well, I have an account, it just goes to one account.
True.
It's another account.
True, but then there's a whole other facet to the criminal side of the mule accounts, so the money mules, and the way that the money is transferred one account to another account. You've probably seen spam that comes in saying, work from home, earn $2,000 a day. All you need to do is have a bank account in this bank, and we'll transfer money into your bank account. You transfer 90% onto another account we give you, or write a check out. So you keep 10% of all the money in there. Great.
I understand,
So-
but if I have an account in the bank, but another account like a checking account, right, and I want to transfer money to the bank account to my checking account, and vice versa. I configure the accounts where it can go to. It can't go to any other place. How are they going to overcome that?
I'll get to that one.
I mean, and then there's got to be out-of-band confirmation of ad accounts. There's
Yep.
ways around complexity of this stuff.
True. And this is where it gets interesting. So let's have a look at the transaction validation. So what you normally expect is, to do a transaction online, you'll do several different pieces of information. You'll have to supply who it's going to go to, how much is it going to be, and basically click OK or submit. And so to prevent additional transactions actually occurring, most sort of banks now ask for a validation code. So this validation code may be a token that they've sent you saying, we've received your information, but just to make sure that this wasn't sent from a rogue machine and things like that, type in this validation key into this form. Click submit, and then you basically say, okay, confirmation, transfer is complete. I've now validated that you said that you wanted to do this transaction, and you validated that you saw the right transaction, and you've said it's okay, so go ahead with this transfer. So what we're then seeing, and this is real, this is how the malware is actually operating, is that you see the same sort of interface of creating your bank transfer. It may be a new account transfer, or it's something a standing order, or an individual, a single transfer. So while you're filling in those forms, the malware is kicking off in the background and it has a second transaction already prepared. Okay. So you go through the submit button. You then get a request for the validation. Okay. However, this submit button and this validation haven't come from the bank. Okay. So the malware has actually created the fake submission button and the fake validation. So you enter the validation information, then you finally click submit, and it comes back with an error message saying, sorry, that didn't work. Okay, it hasn't sent anything to the bank at that stage. And so it says, well, try again, enter a new validation. Okay, and what you're actually doing there is you're validating or providing the validation code for your legitimate transaction. The first time you entered the validation code, that was the validation code for the fraudulent transaction. So by the end, you've clicked submit, and actually what's happened is that there have been two transactions going on at the same time. Okay, and they've been fully validated. Okay. And of course, evil hacker runs off with the money. So what's the bank's response? And so where is the cutting edge of banking technology to protect against these things today? Okay. So the customer has to enter in the same sort of data about transaction, but now we're going to create a token for that transaction. And we're going to make that token based on a physical piece of data. Okay. So we're going to take the user's identity, we're going to take a date timestamp, we're going to take all the details that they had about how much money in the two accounts, and then we're going to give them a physical device to calculate the stuff, and they have some randomness in it, and I'm going to generate a unique key. Okay. So the only way that I can get a second transaction is someone has to go through this process of keying these things back into their calculator to be able to carry out that transaction. Okay. So what does it really look like? So chip and pin transfers, so using these calculators, what you see most popular, especially in Europe at the moment. They started off really in South America, and they're about 2 years old. Unfortunately, they were broken about a year ago. Okay, and this is how it's done. So normally what you have is to go through this process, you go through multiple pages. The first page, which account do you want to send data to? Then you have to go to another page that says, well, how much do you want to send it? How much do you actually want to send? You go into another page, are the details correct? Are you absolutely sure? You then get a page about the instructions and what you need to do using your calculator, type this in, and eventually you get the validation complete. Okay. So with that, your transaction is complete. So what does the malware actually do on this? The malware side is fairly simple. You go through the first 4 pages. Remember, this is a 5-page process. It goes through those first 4 pages, and then the malware starts kicking in. Okay. And so what the malware does is it's created a 5th page. And what it's asking for is a security validation code. Okay. And that validation page requires you to do the same chip and pin technology as well. So it's telling you, it's giving you the instructions about what to do there, and it's called a security code to validate this transaction. So at the end of the day, you've actually used the calculator twice. Okay. And of course at the end, so you've got a 6th page, then the validation complete. So the malware has inserted an extra page to steal this data. And that's really been what we're sort of seeing on bypassing the chip and pin technologies. So we have, the response has really been to ask the victim for that extra information. So here we see the types of data that you'd be typing into a calculator would be the account number and the amount that you want to send. Okay. And so what we see from the social engineering side on the security page is that they ask you to type in the security code and an amount. And the amount happens to be the same that you want to do the first time. But if you have a look at the security code, you'll see it's the same number of digits as an account, and actually that security code is the account that they want to transfer the money to. Okay. So at the end of the day, the malware has provided the tool and the technology to be able to carry out this social engineering that's actually been successful and has bypassed the latest technologies. So what happens if you go now out of band, completely out of band, okay, and you require them to receive, provide things such as an SMS text alert of a transaction, or take an SMS text message with the transaction code that you now need to type in. Frankly, what we're seeing is, because they already have control of that end host and they can ask for any information, they ask for all the details they need to have to phone up the bank or to change online the cell phone number or the where the messages are actually going to go to. We see them using standard VoIP services, which are changing caller IDs numbers, so they can send messages back and forth as well. So they're actually proxying the SMS messages through this way. Okay. It's not sophisticated stuff. It's just a little lateral thinking on how to break these accounts. So what can we sort of say from a security perspective, given that we've just broken the latest banking technologies and anti-theft protection? Key thing we have to understand really is that cyber criminals, and this is cybercrime and it's big, massive scale, is really focused on the bank's own customers. Okay, so that's the elephant in the room. So security consultants really need to understand the threat and be able to communicate the remediation advice on this. So the question then comes, how do you protect your clients from their own customers? Okay. And at the heart of the most advanced things is really the applications themselves. The things that you're asking all those banks or those web applications are trying to do is too complex for the vast majority of people actually out there. So the more complex the application is, the more opportunity there are to social engineer and insert additional requests and additional content through the malware. So what sort of things that we need, do we need to sort of think about when we're looking at web applications and helping design web applications, providing security advice? We have to reduce complexity. So for instance, is it likely any additional pages or fields would actually be spotted by a customer? Okay. So if there's 20 pages to this web application that they have to go through sequentially, would 21 pages be noticed or 19 pages? More often than not, no chance. Okay. Is it clear to the customers what's actually expected of them? Are they supposed to follow this particular process? Okay. How many pages must a customer actually navigate or scroll through to actually do a transaction or to actually do their business? Are all the steps logical? Are important questions and steps presented as text or graphics? That one's actually pretty important, because if you present it as text, it's HTML, okay, and it's just injected in the HTML code. If the question or the page numbering is in a graphic format, that means that graphic has to be pulled from a file, okay, and that's normally enough in most current generation browsers to break the padlock or to say that you have now got multiple zones or insecure zones. Unfortunately, most people are so used to seeing messages saying, do you want to carry on? They'll just say, carry on anyway. Okay, so there's only so much you can do in this. Okay. Have a look at the page design and the way that the page is constructed, and are there any indicators that or watermarking so that a user or customer will be able to identify that changes have been made? Not an easy one to do there. And the last one is really look at the interface and provide advice of how can these things be simplified? Can it all be reduced down to a single page? Other things to look at. Okay, so a key one, which is really catching out, in fact just about all the banks, bank applications are bad at this, is can the customer change everything online? Okay, so all the stuff about SMS texting of your transaction. Okay, if the user can log into their bank account and set which phone number they want that message to go to, and the malware or the attacker already has access to their bank account, they can set that number. So what's the purpose of having that process? So the attacker, by compromising that web application, now can compromise the other out-of-band validation processes. Okay. So what out-of-band verification changes are there? So if someone is actually using out-of-band and those details have changed, how do they get notified that those changes actually happened? So if I now change my mobile phone number or cell phone number to receive these messages, how do I know that that number's actually changed? Okay. Another one, are there delays before these things actually happen? You know, even this malware is done in real time, you know, is it reasonable to expect a 2 or 3 day delay before those new changes come into action? How visible are customer changes? So, you know, when someone logs in, is there any indication that, you know, things have changed for them and what has changed? All pretty obvious stuff. Okay. And a key one really for banking applications is while they can modify the HTML codes and modify balances as they appear in the pages, if there are other devices for keeping track of those balances, such as print statements that come in the post and PDF or signed PDF or encrypted PDF documents that have the real balances. Unfortunately, that requires an education of the end customer to be able to, you know, to balance these different information sources. On the back-end processing, there are a number of things that we can sort of look at as well. Okay, and a lot of it can be done through thresholds. Okay, so how many transactions are actually being conducted by that user per minute? You know, is it reasonable to expect that they can do 2 transactions within, you know, a millisecond? You can also look at creating a delay between, you know, the creation of a new payee account and actually sending through that, transferring that money. You can also look at some of the anomaly detection of transfers. So, you know, are you seeing the same 2 addresses appearing multiple times? The frequency of those 2 addresses or those 2 accounts, and can you also look at the frequencies of accounts being used? So the mule accounts that are acting as the receiver for these fund transfers. And of course, the last thing is the identity changes. So if someone suddenly changes their primary contact number from a home phone number to a cell phone number, you know, you might want to sort of raise or escalate your internal processes for, you know, auditing or inspecting that traffic subsequently. So what can we sort of say in conclusions? Well, first of all, you know, banking Trojans are really, 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 really advanced. Okay, it's more advanced than most of the brain power in this room, I'm sure. Okay. It's already out there. It's a tried and tested technology. To give you an idea of the scale of things, so 2006, State Department released a report for 2006 that said that losses in North America for cybercrime, i.e. mostly banks and that, was higher than the total illegal drugs trade in North America. So it's about $100 billion a year. Okay. IBM, on public records, is about a $100 billion company, you know, and if you look at those statements, you'll see that about 16% of all that money goes towards R&D. We're seeing the same amount, you know, percentage of time dedicated to R&D, and probably a little bit higher by the criminals that are working on this. So, you know, 16, 18, $20 billion a year spent on R&D developing these tools. That's more than the worldwide purchasing of antivirus, firewalls, IDS technologies. Okay. So people sort of ask you about, you know, are we being beaten by the criminals? Like, hell yeah, they're outspending us. Okay. So man-in-the-browser attacks, vectors are unaffected by authentication validation technologies. Okay. This is big business. There's big money to be had in there. It's very well organized. It's very popular. It's very easy to get started in it. Okay. You have to assume that customer details can be gained just by asking them. Okay. So not only do you have to worry about the fact that 1/3 of your customer base probably is already compromised, but any of those people, any of the confidential details that they have in their heads can probably just be asked for by the attackers. Okay. And the last part is really about, you know, how do you simplify things and really, you know, think of, you know, security ergonomics and this whole thing of, you know, trying to reduce the complexity and make it as simple as possible. So with that, hey, on time. I'll take any questions. Question at the back.
Is one browser more vulnerable than the other to this type of attack?
At the moment, it's all about business. It's a numbers game. So the most popular web browsers are the ones that have the most specialized software advances being practiced on them. And of course, the most popular web browser versions are the ones that have, you know, the most malware targeted at them as well. However, this is big business. There are multiple, there are literally dozens and dozens of businesses and organizations that develop malware and are constantly releasing updates to their consumers for the latest versions of browsers and browser support. So when people ask me about, is it a PC, Mac, or whatever as well, it's like, it doesn't matter. This is all about customers at the end. Question?
So obviously there's a lot of money involved in this, but it seems that the price points for toolkits and stuff that are being distributed on the black market are really low. Do they distribute a lot of them, or is that basically what they're willing to sell them for?
Two parts. So they distribute a lot of them. Okay. Of course, all the big security researchers are buying them as well, so we can understand what's going on. But it's highly competitive. Okay. So to get started in this industry, key thing is, I make a point of, so 2000, 2002, everything was about script kiddies. Okay, we heard all about taking the script, running, and all that sort of stuff. Script kiddies then were 12, 14, 15 years old. 6 years on. In those 6 years, they've gone through college, they've gone to university, they've got computer science degrees. They know what they're doing. They're developing this stuff, and they're competing against their colleagues in that. So there are lots and lots of people actually developing this and competing against each other.
It just seems if you're going to be that unethical, there's a lot more money to be made in running the tools than to sit back and actually have to do the work of selling.
You said not to sell.
Well, I mean, but like, it strikes me almost that it's such a low cost point that it may be people who aren't writing the tools distributing them.
Well, but you can't look at it from the U.S. cost perspective. I mean, if they're made in the third world or second world.
It doesn't matter though. If you're running, if the proportion of the cost of the thing versus the amount of money, the difference between $300 and $300,000 is going to be equally as big whether you're in a poor economy or a good economy.
You have to sort of think that there's different aspects to it. So there's the malware creation, there's the third parties that are developing add-ons to this particular malware, there's the IFRAME injection tools for hosting and infecting sites, it's the exploit writers who are developing the malware that's going to install the Trojan in the backdoor in the first place. You've got the IFRAME distribution engines, you've got the SQL injection tools, so there's a whole ecosystem that's actually going on there, and it seems to be a popular pricing point that has been somewhere between $200 and $2,000 seems to be the comfortable part of people sort of getting involved in this business. I'm sure that there are even more sophisticated tools that are being custom designed for certain applications.
I've read about a lot of this, and I understand the whole economy except for that one point. Because to me, it's like if you're organized crime somewhere, you're going to look at the fact that you basically have to run a software business, especially if you're doing recurring licensing and updates, which has an overhead associated with it, or you can just keep it to yourself and rake in millions of dollars. I mean, just strikes me the profit margin on the retail business is so low. Why not just pay for the developer and keep it to yourself?
But if you include the whole idea of what's riskier, probably using the stuff puts you in a bigger risk of the wall.
I think if you're in Eastern Europe or something, you really just don't care.
Having multiple attackers also makes it more difficult for them to identify you.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people involved. Sort of, I mean, there is a lot. So, from what I've sort of seen from the malware sides, banking Trojans for a large part, a finger in the air is probably about quarter, 20%, 25% of them are backdoored themselves, and other people extracting details. But there are so many different facets to this. So, for instance, for me to go online and buy 1,000 banking details, all the details I need to log in as an individual and to do a fund transfer. So 1,000 people's identities I can pick up for maybe $400 or $500. Okay. The trick though is to have that framework so that I have the mules to transfer that money into and get that money back out of the country and turn it into web dollars, PayPal dollars, back to US dollars or whatever. So there's just so many different aspects to it, and I think it just seems that there's supply and demand, and there's also this thing that everyone seems to be comfortable with this sort of pricing range at the moment, which has sort of helped dictating that. So, question about.
So, going back to the actual banking website, the ultimate solution to create some sort of whitelisting or create some way in which bankings are actually interacting directly with the customer instead of relying on the browser.
Well, there are some technologies that are being developed. IBM has big research teams and are looking at these different things. No clear-cut silver bullets for this. And certainly from my side, talking about security strategies for IBM, and that's how one of the things that we're facing is how do you protect your customers from their customers, and that's the whole thing that's really changed, and still working on it. And some of the things that I've run through in the last quarter of the presentation about just looking at those applications and how do you simplify things is more, the first step is being aware that these things are happening, how big it is, and why they're working. And fundamentally, it's the technology is very, very good, but it's very, very good because the social engineering aspects actually work. And if you have a look at a critical eye at your, the next time you log into your bank account, how much data and how many screens you have to go through, and how much data could be requested from you. And how easy would it be for you to notice that extra pages or extra questions have been asked for? And today's applications place all the emphasis on the end user. So a lot of the things that we're looking at rely on correlation engines and anomaly detection that now sit inside the back ends to look for anomalous behaviors and things that are going on. But there are no solutions ready to this today, which means that if you want to make lots of money, think of some, set up your business, and maybe IBM will come along and buy it afterwards.
What about a hardware device that used asymmetric cryptography that sent a message that had to be displayed or entered in the hardware?
At the end of the day, it's down to a user. How many key fobs do you want to carry around? So yes, you can add all these new cool features, but you're increasing complexity.
And cost, but if there's 300,000 or 300 million Americans, and you have 100 billion, that's 3,000 per head in the U.S., so that's a little bit more than what it costs to develop a device like that. Right?
True, but then you've got to train everyone how to use it. I mean, how many people complain about using a remote control for their TV? Okay, and now you're going to say, well, you want to you want to order post-it notes and things like that. There's a question of that.
What success have you had, as you say, getting the companies to protect themselves from their own clients? What success have you had with getting the marketing people to not say turn on all the features, or to understand that the solution to this is not to allow everything possible and then dig out?
It's getting better. To be very honest, a lot of the content that I talked about, and you would have seen some of the dates, and that I could have given this presentation December last year. Okay, in fact, I gave a little bit of snippet of this sort of thing, which resulted in me not allowed to talk about it, and had bank accounts closed. Okay, and things have moved on from there. So education, understanding what's actually really happening there. There's still a long, long way to go on this, but yeah, I mean, we're in this. We just need to look at Vista and all the latest operating systems. Everything's about features. Okay, so we're still on that. So security is still a back burner. That's the last question before we have to get out of here.
Are you going to post your slides somewhere?
Yes, I think they've made a request for them, and they'll be on the Owasp website. Cool. Thank you all.